Say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you're signing in from today. I did see quite a few time zones, so really appreciate everybody joining us today. I've got with me Giga Metals newly minted president Mark Jarvis and incoming CEO Scott Lendrum to discuss corporate changes at Giga Metals. Mark, Scott, how are you guys today?
I'm just great. Thanks, Romeo.
Very well, thanks, Romeo.
Awesome. Great. So here's how today's going to work. I'm going to ask some questions to Mark and Scott to give some context and information for yesterday's news. But this is an interactive event. So I've already received some questions from you guys over email. We'll be tackling those today. But there's also a chat button on the bottom right hand of your screen. You can use it at any point during today's event to ask questions to both Mark and Scott, and we'll try and tackle them towards the end of today's event. If they fit right into the conversation, I'll try to sneak them in, but we'll get to as many as we can today. If for whatever reason I don't get to your question during today's event, I'm still going to make sure that the Giga team gets it alongside your emails, so they'll be able to reach out and get back to you as soon as possible, but we really will try and tackle as many of them as we can today. Last piece of housekeeping, today's event is also being recorded. Will be available for replay probably in just a few hours. It'll pop right into your inbox, and you'll be able to, at that point, share it, watch it, do whatever you'd like. But let me get right into the protein of today's event. So Mark, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Awesome. So I know you've led Giga Metals for as long as I've known you, and a good 15 years before that, and delivered successfully that pre-feasibility study in October 2023. I'm curious, what do you consider your greatest achievement during your tenure, and what foundation have you built for Scott to now build on?
Well, I mean, we figured out that the money that we've spent directly on the project is something north of $60 million. And so putting that all together, raising the money and spending it when the market permits, slowing down and not doing much when the market's bad, and just keeping on going. But I think the PFS is kind of the major milestone. It's a very good document. It's a very conservative document. It accurately describes the project, and I'm proud of it. So
that's great. One thing I wanted to ask is, obviously you're going into your new role as president. So I'm curious if you could elaborate on how you're going to approach that role, how to continue to support the company's strategic objectives, and what kind of areas are you going to focus on in this new capacity?
Well, I'll just be running the company day to day, so all the sort of peas and carrots that it takes to run the company. It's nothing particularly glamorous about it, but also I'll be working with Scott on strategy and and helping to support him in terms of financing and in terms of dealing with potential strategic partners. And it's that high level stuff that Scott has been brought in for, and I think that's where his strengths lie. So it's a case of this is my baby. I'm not going anywhere, and
Sure.
But it's a case of putting together the bench strength to carry on forward. I searched for a Scott, and I ended up finding exactly who I was searching for. It's quite amazing, actually. It's quite lucky. I think we're very lucky here. So.
Well, that's great. Now, I know this transition comes obviously at a kind of important time for the company with the PFS completed and the company moving towards the kind of next phase. But I'm curious for your perspective, why do you think now is the right time for this transition, and how does it position Giga for its next growth phase?
This is for me, Romeo?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, we've hit a bit of an air pocket in terms of nickel pricing.
Sure.
And so it's become quite difficult. So two things at the same time. It's difficult to carry the project forward in this kind of pricing environment, but it's also an incredible opportunity. I mean, I think Scott's like the smart money. It's like, you get in when the price is right, and then in his case, he's going to be working to uncover the value that's here. I mean, there's so much value here at these prices. It's to me, it's crazy that we're trading as cheap as we're trading, but it is what it is. The market is what it is, and I don't control the nickel price. So there's that, but also, we've got exploration potential. We've got an incredible copper target at the property that I would love to investigate further. It's just there's all sorts of reasons to increase our bench strength right now, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Awesome. Speaking of bench strength, Scott, I'm going to get you in here for a bit.
Sure.
There's a couple of things I wanted to ask you. So I know I looked into your background. You got really obviously extensive experience in mining, investment banking, M&A transactions, et cetera. So what I'm curious is, how do you view Giga Metals' positioning in the current nickel market, and what opportunities are you seeing for value creation?
Well, I think on the first point, Romeo, I was aware of Giga and Turnigan prior to the discussions with Mark. And then when Mark and I began chatting several weeks ago, as I said, I knew about the project, I knew the specs on it, but what was really intriguing in terms of where the project sits globally was just how much work and the quality of the work that Mark and the team had done to get it where it is now. And I'm sure Mark can speak to greater detail about this, but the economics speak for themselves in the PFS that was released in 2023. There aren't that many quality, long-lived, multi-generational projects in the nickel space that are out there. And I think when you look at the jurisdiction, as obviously BC is a great place to do mining. And as I said, Mark and the team have taken this, tremendously forward. And speaking with Mark and the technical team, what was really striking was the amount of effort put into the more qualitative elements of the project as well. And if Mark could allude on this or elaborate on this, please do. But they've done a great job in establishing and maintaining relationships with First Nations groups, which is obviously incredibly important when you're building a mine or developing a project. They did a tremendous job bringing in Mitsubishi, which is a world-class partner for the project a couple of years ago, and which aided in the development of the PFS. As I mentioned, the technical team is best in class. I don't think there may not be a better team in terms of nickel processing in the world right now. And then also the environmental stewardship element. If you go through the PFS and speak with the team, they've done a great job in tying down the environmental implications of mining in BC and what that entails. And I think when you put all those together, I think it positions Giga and Turnigan as a go-to project for the nickel space. And maybe if I could touch on Mark's previous point, just to, I look forward to working with Mark and helping him bring this project along. I think they've done a great job getting it here. And it should be an exciting time to work together to take it forward.
Awesome, Mark. I don't know if you wanted to get in there, but I do have a couple more for Scott if you don't.
Oh no, you just carry on.
Perfect. One thing, Scott, I wanted to ask about is, there is a 1.9 billion initial capital requirement for Turnigan, and I'm curious, in your new role, what's your strategy for advancing that project financing, and how will your investment banking relationships, your Rolodex, help secure that necessary funding?
I think it's twofold. I think first, there's going to be work to do to get to that stage of discussion. And so as a near-term priority, there's going to be a need for capital to do more drilling and get to an environmental assessment for the project. But as an investment banker, I can tell you that the discussions with strategic groups have long lead times. And those are discussions that I'm really keen to kick off right away, so that all the groups that we can talk to are aware of the project and are up to speed as best we can get them. And with my experience working for a couple of the largest banks in the world and focusing on mining and metals for the past 20 years, I can bring that network to Giga and to Mark and the team. And in parallel paths, we will continue the work at Turnigan, drilling it, getting it environmentally ready. As Mark alluded to, a copper target, which certainly warrants exploration. And then in conjunction with that, we'll begin nurturing those relationships with strategics, whether they be mining groups, OEMs, off-takers, et cetera. And I think maybe broadly in terms of the scope of the landscape, I think we're seeing more creative elements pop into the mining finance sphere in the last several years, which dovetails nicely with the provinces and the federal government's push towards securing critical minerals in country. So I think fortunately for us and Turnigan in particular, we'll have a multitude of options to look at over the course of the next several years, and which I think will position us very, very well for picking that right partner and optimizing how we build this project forward.
If I can jump in on that a little bit, Romeo. Scott and I have discussed this before. Is that the current government of Canada? I think they're doing a really good job of trying to create a regulatory framework where the big pension funds will feel comfortable investing in Canada again.
Yeah.
That element of the financial landscape has been missing from the mining business, but also from the infrastructure business writ large. I mean, you don't see them in pipelines, for example, or power lines. To the best of my knowledge, maybe I'm wrong there, but I think that the government is aware that you've got to be able to have some certainty about your ability to build a project before you can attract private capital, like pension funds. And so, if the government is successful in just doing that alone, it's going to be a huge boost to the mining business, not only from in terms of getting mines financed, but in terms of getting the roads and power lines and all of the infrastructure financed as well.
Yeah, and Romeo, if I could add just to Mark's point, I mean, we're seeing more creativity on the part of those sorts of groups now. And I think, like, obviously with a project of the scale of Turnagain, there's going to be a creative solution at the end of the day that's going to help build this project. And it's very encouraging to see the groups that Mark alluded to, the pension funds and the infrastructure groups starting to get involved, even things like ports and terminals, et cetera. So I think the landscape's opened up, and that just bodes well for us as we take this project forward.
Awesome. I got some questions that I want to get you both on, just to, how you'll work together, I think, on some of these items. First one, I want to talk about that exploration upside, because you both alluded to it already during today's chat. I'm curious, how are you planning to prioritize exploration activities alongside advancing Turnagain as is?
Well, basically the way I see it is, it was very, very interesting to bring fresh eyes to the project from a very, very talented international geologist, Dr. Stephen Beresford. And there's all sorts of targets that he's identified. But the one that intrigues me the most is the copper target, because of the optionality of having a different metal. So
Sure.
Whatever the price of nickel's doing isn't necessarily correlated with what the price of copper's doing. So it gives you, more resilience. The other thing is that the type of target that he's identified and that, that he wanted to identify and that we wanted him to identify is high grade. We're looking for massive sulfides. And we're looking for them at depth, sort of underneath the low grade cloud that's at the surface here. One of the most interesting observations that he made is that he thinks that the whole system is in its original configuration. So it's upright. And that means that all the roots of the system of the magma chamber are still in place underneath. And it's those constriction points where you tend to get massive sulfides. So I'm really interested in that. You look at this whole project, everything we've drilled volumetrically amounts to maybe 20% of what's prospective here. I mean, it's just such a large system that I have never had the budget to properly explore it. And as a junior, you don't have that kind of budget, and you have to be easy. And so right now, we're choosing this copper target as something to prioritize. There's all sorts of other things we could prioritize as well, but we just, we can't do everything.
Sure. There's somebody in the chat who just notes that Dr. Beresford is great, and he's working with Polymetallic and getting them to a polymetallic mine. So some reinforcement from the chat there. There's also a question, though, in the chat, based on what you just said, from Rock, who asks, when are we looking at, and answer that your ability, obviously, to have that copper asset begin to be explored?
Well, I'm hoping that we'll be able to do something this summer. We're not there yet. I can't speak until we've got money in the bank. I can't speak for sure. And but I'm thinking it's possible that we could get started on exploring that this summer.
And I think, Mark, it's fair to say that is a priority for us right out of the gate. So, yeah.
Awesome. One thing I wanted to ask about is kind of competitive positioning. This leads into some of the questions that are in the chat too. But I know, and Mark, you and I have talked about this for sure before, with Indonesia dominating that nickel supply, but there is a growing demand for sustainable nickel sources. how do you view, and this is a question for both of you, and Scott, I can start with you here. How do you see Turnagain's competitive advantages, particularly that low carbon profile, Canadian jurisdiction? How do you see that playing out in the market of tomorrow, in the near-term future?
Well, I think, Romeo, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head already. I think, as we see in Indonesia, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen there. And the environmental impact of some of the operations in Indonesia raises a lot of questions. I think, and a credit to Mark and the team for doing the proper environmental work ahead of time to get confidence around what Turnagain could be and will be is important. And I think, when we deal with sustainability, I think the groundwork has been laid already, and it's up to us to take that forward. And having a government that's more proactively involved in helping development of mining projects is going to help that effort. So I think we're very well positioned as a country, and in particular for Giga in terms of Turnagain as well. So.
Yeah. There were a couple of questions actually about the supportive nature of the jurisdiction. So one that came in on email in advance of today's event. They wanted to know if you think the new government in Canada is likely to have any impact, positive or negative, on outlook for mining in BC. I'll throw it to either of you.
I think it's really positive. I think, put it this way, the wind's in our sails in that regard. And so now's the time, and that's another reason I'm particularly excited to get, Scott involved. Sometimes in Vancouver we can feel quite far from the political action federally, but Scott's in Toronto, and so he's a little closer to the political action. And so it's not just about strategics. It's not just about the capital markets. It's about starting to build relationships with politicians as well, and with bureaucrats that are assigned to, affect the will of the politicians.
And Romeo, if I could just add to that point, I think the federal government in particular is becoming, or is increasingly aware that securing domestic supply isn't really an option. It's not something that's nice to have. It's becoming critical. Especially with certain commodities that China controls or Indonesia controls. We have the ability and the potential here to control our own destiny in that respect. And I think this government sees that potential. And I think it's the betterment of companies like Giga and the entire industry in Canada that there's a forward-thinking view on that from the government.
Oh, great. And Oren from the chat asked, just as a kind of sidebar to this, is he thinks the bill from the government to fast-track infrastructure projects, if that'll work for projects like Turnagain and other resources that Canada can be a leader in for rare earths. So current bills for infrastructure speed-ups, you think that's a positive impact on Turnagain?
Yeah, absolutely. And, another element of this is if you read our PFS, our off-site infrastructure costs, part of the CapEx, basically to build the roads and to build the road and to bring in the power line. It's something on the order of $200 million US. I mean, it's a big chunk of our CapEx. And so if the government were to take that on, it would have an immediate impact on the financial viability of the project. It would be a huge impact. And it also would send a message to international investors, which is, I can't understate or I can't overstate the importance of that.
Absolutely.
Great. I do want to, there's some great questions in the chat that I'm going to get to shortly, but I just had a couple left of my own. I just want to talk timeline for a quick second. I'd love if there's a lot of existing Giga shareholders, but also some prospective shareholders in the room. I'm curious if you could provide everybody with just as clear a view as you both have, the timing for the next stages of the project. Whoever would like to start.
Mark, you want to go ahead with that?
Sure. Well, again, I'm hoping that we can start the copper exploration this summer. We need to do some geophysics out of the gate to further refine the targets, and I think we can get that done. It's not cost prohibitive, and then we'll have a better understanding of the targets, which will make it better to come back the following year and do some drilling. The other big item I'd like to do, but this is longer term. If we could get $10 million into the joint venture company at some point, I would love to launch the environmental assessment It's important to be well enough funded to carry it through to completion once you launch that. You don't want to start the environmental assessment. So you want to have that certainty that you've got the money in place. But we're ready to go. I mean, in terms of this PFS, we've got a lot of confidence in the model. And so, you start an environmental assessment by submitting a project description. And we are confident that we've got this, there's going to be some shaving around the edges. There's going to be some optimization, but the big pieces of this project, I think, are well understood. And we've looked at all the sort of different options. We've done all sorts of different, trade-off studies. And, we feel confident in our project description. So that's important to start the environmental assessment. That's something that I would love to get going. It's a stage of the project where you get the First Nations even more involved. Our view is that you don't want to do an environmental assessment, with outside consultants and then pass it to the First Nations and say, here you go, what do you think? You want the involvement at every stage of the process. And I think that's incredibly important. So that in terms of project development, I think that's the most important next step myself.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's going to be obviously I start next week, and that'll be the first, I guess, one of the first things that we sit down as a group and hammer out so that we can hit the ground running.
Awesome. N. Cordelucci from the chat asks, and I'll ask kind of different versions of this to Mark and then to yourself, Scott. Ask, how is your relationship with Mitsubishi? So Mark, I'll kind of ask how it is up to this point, and then Scott, how you intend to work with them as a partnership. But Mark, I'll start with you.
Well, it's interesting. They're a great partner. They're very straightforward. They do what they say they're going to do. And they've also been, excellent in terms of introducing us to other potential strategic partners that they like to get involved with. And as Scott alluded to, these conversations are a long lead time. I mean, I think Mitsubishi was about a 3-year process to get them to yes. And it's similar for all of the big companies. Now, it's helpful that Mitsubishi's already in. And it's also helpful that when we're meeting with companies that they're introducing us to, we're meeting them at a much higher level than I would be able to get to as president of a junior company in Canada. So, it's all very helpful. Scott and I had a Teams meeting with Mitsubishi last week. I think it went very well. And tomorrow, Scott's flying out to Vancouver, and we're meeting some of the team from Tokyo. We're going to have a meeting with them tomorrow, and then have a nice dinner, which I'm looking forward to. So,
there you go, Scott. I'll throw it to you.
If I could, Romeo, just to echo what Marcus said. I mean, my plan is to work with Mark to keep that relationship going. They've been a strong partner, and really to have them as integrated as we can to make sure that they're fully up to speed on what we're doing, and we have their involvement all the way, and to keep that successful relationship going, because it's been invaluable and we'll continue to do so.
Great. One specific question from the chat from Andrew Reed. He asks, are you going to use the same technology as Power Metallic to find the polymetallic shoots associated with deposits as you've described? He just notes it's worked incredibly well for them.
Yeah. The answer is yes, but, okay, the thing about Power Metallic, which is truly remarkable, I've been following that with great interest. I think it's quite an exciting play myself. Is that the EM has worked so well for them. And so far, they haven't drilled a false positive. I don't know if you realize how unusual that is. False positives are a big part of geophysics. And you have to figure out how to ameliorate that. I don't expect that we'll have that same environment at Turnagain. I think we will have false positives. But I also think that there's ways to distinguish between them. And it's another reason that we're particularly interested in the copper area, because in the nickel area of the of the ultramafic intrusive, the reducing agent is graphite. And graphite is just a famous false positive for EM. It just lights up just like a massive sulfide would, and it's hard to distinguish between a chunk of graphite and a chunk of massive sulfide. In the copper area, magnetite is the reducing agent. Now here I am talking geology, and I'm not a geologist, but it's monkey here, monkey repeat. This is from that because magnetite is a reducing agent in the copper area, false positives will be less of a problem. So yeah, there you go. It's EM is going to be a very good tool when we get to drilling. I think downhole EM is going to be a very good tool as well.
Great. I got a couple questions on the macro from the chat. So Scott, I'll start off with you on this one. Toby, thanks for joining us today. He asked, will the financing environment turn around for nickel? How long will prices be depressed? I know there's some crystal ball gazing here, but I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously it's impossible to predict the nickel price, with any sort of certainty. But I think the market will turn. I think ultimately has to. And I think you're seeing, the need for, secure supplies, the issues in Indonesia. I think it's bound to come. I can't predict when it's going to come, obviously, and I don't think anyone can. But I think what we want to do, and I think to what Marcus has already said, is that we've positioned ourselves to capture that when it does turn. When it's low, we do what we can to keep going, and then when it's taking a run, we do the best we can to make sure we capitalize on it. And I think we've got a project that is primed for that move, and the team has done the work to get it ready for that. And then so when it does move, and as I said, I can't predict when that's going to happen, but when it does move, we're going to be in a great position to capitalize on that and take advantage of it as best we can. So, I don't know if Mark, if you have any thoughts on that as well, but
yeah, I just want to point out the joker in the deck, which is that sort of a black swan event that could happen in the nickel market, and that would be if the Indonesian government decided to restrict mining licenses.
Yeah,
because the price is too low, and a lot of the Chinese are losing money in Indonesia. It's not that low cost, particularly when it comes to the battery supply chain. And there's been talk of them restricting the mining licenses by up to reducing them by up to 30%, just so that you could have a price bounce so that everybody could be profitable in Indonesia. They haven't done that yet. I think if they did do that, my prediction is you'd see the price of nickel up by 50% in a week, and it would be game on. But again, they haven't done that yet, and I'm not sure why. It seems like the obvious move, but in the absence of them doing that, it's just going to take a while. The grades gradually are getting lower in Indonesia. The deposits, they're moving further inland. So the logistics are more expensive. The grade being lower raises the cost per unit produced. So the costs are gradually going higher in Indonesia, and gradually that will affect the price.
Yeah.
Great. One last macro question from the chat. They just note as the EV revolution has kind of adjusted and some new batteries use a different percentage of nickel. What do you gentlemen think is going to drive the price of nickel going forward? What is the major thing that's going to impact? So I know you've already touched on it, but just if you've got any additional answers, you can throw it out.
Mark, do you want to take this, or do you want me to? Or?
Well, why don't you start? I've got a couple of ideas. But.
Sure. I think the EV trend is going to be there still. Obviously, other metals will play a role in the battery metals thing, but there's also a need for defense metals and that sort of thing. So I think there's a nickel. It benefits from multi-use applications. And Mark will be undoubtedly better to speak to the intricacies of the nickel market than I am at this point. But I think the EV trend will be there. But I think electrical storage in general will necessitate more nickel in the future. And I think so. Going forward, I think I can only see upside. But as I said before, I don't know when that's going to be. But I would defer to Mark in terms of his thoughts on as he mentioned, he does have some thoughts. So I'd be keen to get those.
Yeah. No, long term, you can't compete with nickel for energy density. So if you're looking to maximize your energy density in batteries, you got to have as much nickel as possible on the cathode. One of the problems with energy density is that you are more prone, the more energy density you get, the more prone you are to thermal runaway. And so there's that balance. And that's what the battery companies have spent a horrendous amount of research dollars on figuring out both chemical and mechanical engineering solutions to control, runaway, thermal runaway. And again, I get back to, this little article I noticed almost a year ago now. LG Chemical has come up with a membrane that goes in the battery between the cathode and the collector. It's a nanometer thick, and it lets lithium ions go back and forth freely until the temperature goes up. And once the temperature gets up beyond the normal range of temperatures for a battery, it shuts down. Like it becomes impermeable to ions. And I look at that, and it's an elegant solution, I think, to thermal runaway. It's scalable. LG expects to be commercializing this quickly. That's what they've said. And in the experiments they did, they took, high energy density, batteries and dropped weights on them. And like 75% of them burst into flames and burned out. The ones with the membrane installed, very few of them burst into flames. I forget the number, but it was, like 10% or something. And the ones that did, just stopped very quickly. So they burst into flames and then stopped. So, I mean, to me, this opens the door for really high energy density batteries. And when I look long term, I mean, I think about, first of all, you think about the stainless steel market. That's there. It's not going away. It's still 65%. And it grows slightly faster than world GDP because you've got more stainless steel into developing countries. So that's not going anywhere. You've got EVs. The coming thing that I'm looking at that I think is quite exciting is robotics. I think over the next 10 years, you're going to see a lot of robots in our lives, and they're going to need really high energy density batteries. So sure. I just hope, I mean, it's all coming at us. It's all obvious. The only thing I don't know is the exact timing.
Sure, that makes sense. Now to close off today, because I know we're just past the half hour that I said we'd be at, I'm going to ask you both a big, broad question, if you don't mind. And that's really looking ahead, like kind of what is your shared vision for Giga Metals over the next 3 to 5 years? And really, I think to put a specific point out, what are you most excited about? And I'll go one at a time for you guys, but Scott, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think over the next 3 to 5 years, I mean, for me, what I'd like to see is, I really want to maximize the exploration targets that we have. That Dr. Beresford's already, shown to be there. The copper in particular, as Mark alluded to, and seeing what's beneath what we already know as that sort of low-grade cloud, as Mark put it. But then longer term, I mean, and one of the reasons why I was intrigued by this opportunity is that I want to establish those relationships with the strategic groups, the financing groups, and really be in a position in 3 to 5 years where Giga is at a point where we're maybe spoiled for choice when it comes to our partnership opportunities, and have relationships with some of the biggest groups in the world that can take a project of this scale forward. Because there aren't that many out there, and I think you do need, as Mark mentioned, and I hit on earlier, they do take a long time to nurture and develop, and you do have to spend time with these groups and make sure that they're comfortable with all elements of the project. It won't be done overnight, but over the next 3 to 5 years, I'd love to see us in a position where we have that choice to make, and sort of decide our own destiny in that respect, and and carry on the work that Mark and the team have done thus far.
Well, thank you for that, Scott. I think further to that, I talked about the environmental assessment, and in terms of, I think, dealing with the strategics, if we can get that one underway. The project itself is well understood. The ore body is well understood. Our geometallurgical program associated with the PFS was brilliant. We can predict with very narrow error bars what our recoveries will be in all different parts of the deposit and all different grades of nickel. So technically this is well advanced. So, what risk is left? Well, the risk is the environmental assessment. And we don't see any showstoppers, but we haven't done the environmental assessment. And that's why you do it, is you've got to uncover, every possible showstopper. I can't imagine what that would be, but nonetheless, you have to do it. So in terms of the really big companies, if you could get through an environmental assessment, if you're not already there with them and you get an environmental assessment that is clean, that's kind of the last big risk that you're taking away.
Awesome. Well, Mark, Scott, thank you so much for this conversation. I think it was very helpful context. I know there were tons of you in the room. Really appreciate all your time. And of course, those who ask questions. If you think of the perfect question to ask as soon as this event ends, as I often do, please do still send it through. I'll make sure that the Giga team gets it and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. But gentlemen, thank you so much. I think this was a great chat.
Well, thank you, Romeo. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
Have a great.
Thank you, Mark. Take care.